given that time is short, I'm going to launch straight into it. And while William is still here, be careful, people, what you wish for, because a couple of years ago, when the possibility of having Dr. Gommans come on stage at the Jaipur Lit Fest came up, we have a common acquaintance also, and William said, I've always wanted to have him here if he's in India or if he's not. And I said, oh, I would like to do a session with him. I didn't know what I was wishing for, because this is, I think, way above my head. But the gods heard me. Maybe the sun god, the solar cult heard me. So without much ado, let's make use of the time. We want to give time to you good people to have questions also. I think I want to start with a little anecdote. Because you're talking here about Neoplatonism, you're talking about the solar cult, you're talking about a lot of things that people feel are, yes, history, but mostly philosophy. And where does Greek philosophy, if Plato is Greek only, and Indian philosophy, if Indian philosophy is unadulterated, nothing else, those things don't happen. Where do they interconnect? So I want to go way, 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 way back in time. I'm a historian of sorts. I'm an archaeologist, lapsed one. But one of the things I recall from the urban legend we heard about early history was that in the 3rd, 2nd centuries BCE, the second of the Mauryan emperors, the one whose father would have known about the Macedonian Alexander coming to India, asks, in writing, he writes to someone in Antioch, I forget who it is, but would have been whoever's in charge of things there, says, please may I have some wine, may I have some figs, and can you send across a Greek philosopher? He was more specific. He'd asked for one in particular, one type of whatever philosophy they were following. Off the top of my head, I can say sophist, I would be wrong. And the reply is, and this is interesting, he gets the figs and he gets the wine. Presumably he had them. And the philosopher says, whoever it was at Antioch, they're notoriously difficult to push around. So sorry, you just have to make do with whatever comes your way. So in this case, what is coming our way? Would you like to just talk about the book first?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, so thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. Normally, if I speak about Neoplatonism, there are just 2 people in the room. That's actually my wife and my son. So in that sense, it's a big improvement. Especially when I bring in also the Mughals, then it really becomes difficult in the Netherlands, I must say. So for me, being in philosophy is a bit of an old story. So philosophy really is very separate from history often. So we have philosophers, we have history of philosophy, but they never interact with historians. So the world of philosophers and the world of historians is completely separate. So I'm actually an amateur in philosophy, but to really understand from the inside out, let's say the ideology of the Mughals, so how to understand the founding fathers of that empire that now exists 500 years, one has to know about Neoplatonism. So that was also what for me, there was no alternative than to go into philosophy. And then, then all of a sudden you find out that Neoplatonism is not at all European. So lots of friends of mine were saying, oh, Jos, is this your way of bringing Europe back into India through the back door? No, but Neoplatonism is a Middle Eastern, Asian philosophy. So the people who started it are actually from Syria, from Egypt, from Anatolia. So the problem is actually that we in the West, because we have our gymnasias, we think that Plato and Aristotle is a European figure.
Correct.
And of course that is not the case, because Plato, so that's my main message also for today, and also in the book and also in other things that I did on this, is that Plato is at its most successful in Mughal India. So there you find something that comes very close to the Platonic Republic, for example. So we people don't look for Platonism in the East, but if you look, it's all over the place.
Well, the other technical term you brought in, almost made me reach for not one, several dictionaries. You're talking about the time period. You're talking about millenarianism. which a lot of people might confuse with the millennials, which they well might, but it's different. Do you want to talk about this,
Yeah,
this
so I
glorious era?
Yeah, so I think in general, we are talking about the 16th century. So yesterday, or it was the day before yesterday, it was called the Dark Renaissance when we were talking about Shakespeare in England. But for India, this is really an enlightening Renaissance, really a very important moment of flourishing ideas, circulating ideas, entanglements.
What makes you think that? Or not think? What makes you state that?
Because it's a period of experiment, and very successful experiment because it happened at the court. So, if I'm allowed to say so, by far the most important Mughal emperor was Akbar, and what he tried to do at that moment is actually to bring together the wisdom of the world and create something new. So the wisdom of the world was not only Islamic, was not only Hindu, it was also the lore of Greece, it was also folk stories, it was also Christianity. So there was a kind of an open, let's say, a milieu at that time. So he loved debate. There was a massive translation movement, not only from, let's say, the home literature that people in the Islamic world would know, for example, about the old Iranian kingship, etc., but there was also a massive project to translate epics, Hindu epics, into Persian.
At Akbar's own court, yes.
Yes. So in that sense, I think it's a remarkable period, and you don't see a very clear parallel where it is so successful. So the overall idea was total peace, sulh-i-kul in Persian, which means, well, take whatever is intelligent, wisdom from other traditions and try to bring them together and create something new. And for that, let's say for that purpose, especially, well, it's especially something that is coming in very handy if you're an emperor and you have a very diverse empire, then Neoplatonism is the ideal ideology.
So let's go down that road a little bit.
Yeah.
Because, you know, sitting in India reading about the Mughal Empire, or sitting in other parts of the world reading about the Mughal Empire, it's all very easy to say Akbar is experimenting, he's listening to the Jesuits, he's listening to traditional Indian, the Jains, the saints, the monks, everyone, and coming up with something new. But from the way you're putting it, he is really borrowing ideas that have been around and coming up with a synthesis that has possibly also been around, but in his own way. Do you want to just explore that a little further with our audience?
Well, I think what is really important is that, you know, let's say from the 21st century before Trump, I think people would love Akbar in a sense that he brings together all these traditions. He's very cosmopolitan, inclusive. At the same time, we should also be aware not to make a hero out of him, because he is actually himself is the philosopher king, if you like, who has a very privileged position. So you should know that Akbar is not a very brilliant scholar, because he is actually illiterate. But that's also the nice story about him. So there's a little miracle that although he is illiterate, he has this huge impact, and he has this translation project that's about books. And what is special about him is that he is well, you can see him as an autocrat, but there's a good reason why he is in charge, because he has a special relationship. He has a special capacity, his intelligence, to communicate with the higher world. So to communicate with the one through the sun. So there the sun comes in. So he is, let's say, in between the, let's say, Neoplatonic spheres, and he is a kind of a trailblazer, if you like. He's a trailblazer. So if you follow him, he becomes a kind of a guru who actually guides you to a higher sphere where, well, which is something for Neoplatonists and also for Sufis, it's very important to forget about the materialist world, to become really dedicated to the higher world through meditation also, meditation,
but mediation.
Through magic, yeah, so also magic.
Well, let's pause there for a minute, because again, when we bring in Neoplatonism, when you bring in the Sufis, would you care to make the connect a little more obvious for our audience?
Yeah, I think, well, perhaps I should try to define Neoplatonism for a moment.
Maybe.
So, I wonder what AI would say if I would give me just 3 sentences to... normally, Neoplatonism would take, let's say, a couple of years. It took me a couple of years to really understand it. But a Neoplatonist has a kind of idea that the reality is layered. Right. So at the very top of reality is the one. So the one is also the place where is the good. So the one is completely unified. And there, it flows into the next level, downwards, to what is intellect. So that's also the Platonic world of forms. So these abstract ideas that are the real world. Further going down, there's a third stage. There you go through the soul, you go through the materialist world, and that, of course, is in terms of reality, it's the least valuable. It's the least true. So what we see right now, what we are doing is not really happening. So
we're the lowest, the third level.
Yeah, exactly. So if you think, so the challenge for every individual, for humankind, is to go back to that unity. So there Sufism comes in. So Sufism is also about, I don't know whether you know this idea by Ibn Arabi, who is about the unity of being. So they also stress that everything is divine and that you have to do some kind of exercises, meditation, rituals to go back into that divine. So Sufism is, of course, in that sense, it's the branch of Neoplatonism. Mm-hmm. So the big guy behind Sufism in terms of its philosophy is Ibn Arabi. He's a 13th century guy from Spain, but he was extremely influenced by these Neoplatonic ideas. So if you would say Akbar was very Sufic, I would say yes, also, but it's not the entire story, because you also need some part of philosophy that's not in Sufism. So
the part which is not, which also includes what?
For example, the sun,
right.
the sun worship.
I thought we would come to the sun, yes.
Yeah, we come to the sun. So I think what we should stress is that there were founding fathers of the empire. If you talk about the United States, there's a whole cult about the founding fathers. So Washington and all these guys. But also the Mughal Empire has founding fathers. And the problem with, let's say, historiography these days is that these founding fathers should be Indian, isn't it? Because if you look at the historiography of the Mughal Empire, there's a lot, let's say 90% is about how Indian that empire was. But we should not forget that the people that really had a huge impact on these ideas came from Iran. And they actually were refugees from the Safavid Empire, and they were completely into Neoplatonism, and they brought different ideas about light, about the impact of light, which also connected to the idea that the Mughal dynasty had, let's say, a kind of a light beam that was actually making them legitimate, coming from, not from the sun, but from, let's say, somewhere outside. So that was far. Yeah, so there was also, if you look at Akbar and miniatures, there's always this light coming from his hand.
The halo around his head.
Yeah, his halo, which is, of course, is very old. You also see a Buddha with a halo. But I think it was in Dan Brown. So I read Dan Brown now to make it easier to explain Neoplatonism. And he also talks about the halo. And in the halo, he's saying, it appears that light is coming from the heart or coming from the person that has this light. But according to Dan Brown, and he's perfectly right, there's also light coming from outside to the individual. So I think for Akbar, it's like Christ. So there's also this grace that is coming from the divine, from God, the one, that also makes him special. And that makes, of course, Neoplatonism dangerous, because any dictator can actually claim that he is a philosopher ruler. As, for example, also somebody like Imam Khomeini, he also was reading Neoplatonic stuff. And so he still, one of his favorite books is Plotinus, the founding father of Neoplatonism. And you can see with Khomeini and what's happening in Iran now, that it's also not this happy flower power ideology that we may think it is. So in that sense, it has nice sides, inclusive, cosmopolitan. It can bring people together. At the same time, it can be a very dangerous ideology for a small circle of people who claim that they have the brilliant intellect, that they should be beyond the others. And the others, they have the Sharia, it's fine. For them, it's fine. But we have this relationship.
But when you have someone who says they have this relationship, or even if they don't say it, it is assumed. Again, coming back to the example of Akbar, you have the emperor, you have all the right paraphernalia around. He often also, if you're not jumping the gun too much, he also makes the performances that kind of legitimize this link to the sun. Where it is happening, do they also have to state that they have this divine right to rule? Which kings do in any case.
I think the sun cult was not something that had a long endurance. So it was just a few years that it really became important. And then later his son, Jahangir, he's still using the symbols. Think about Louis XIV, the Sun King. So I think it is important to make a distinction. So on the one hand, you have a devotion to the sun, which is Neoplatonic, and which you find, let's say, also the Julian the Apostate, the emperor of the Roman Empire in the 4th century, had a Neoplatonic sun cult. The Pope, that was also in the book, had a Neoplatonic sun cult because he was advised by intellectuals from Neoplatonist background. But of course, the symbol of the sun, the metaphor, is extremely powerful, and you find that everywhere. So you also have the Rajput dynasties.
We do indeed, but let's go back in time then to the 6th century, or the 5th century, is it?
It's the 4th century.
The 4th, all right, even further back.
Yeah.
So let's go back there, and the solar cult as it emerges at that period, again, with the Neoplatonism already there.
I think there's an interesting parallel between Julian the Apostate and, if you like, Akbar the Apostate. Because there were lots of people at the court of Akbar that didn't like this experimenting. Because if I'm a Muslim, what should I do with sun worship? And then Akbar said, he cited from the Quran, there's also the sun, it was always easy to avoid that kind of criticism. But in a way, he can be compared to Julian, because Julian was fighting Christianity, for the rise of Christianity. So he really tried to go back to the ancient religion, and then thought perhaps the sun can help us, because that is certainly something that is closer to Christianity, because at least there is some kind of, it's not monotheistic, but still the sun is still, let's say, more attractive than all these gods and goddesses.
Hundreds of gods, maybe.
Yeah. So in that sense, I think, so clearly, a very authoritative figure at Akbar's court was Badauni. He was a jurist, and he is all the time extremely critical, and he thinks that Akbar is not a Muslim anymore. But I would say, like Julian, also Akbar is still a Muslim, although Islam is just one of the many pathways. So in that sense, also you come across that attitude quite often also in India. So if you're a Christian, it's nice for you, why not? So there's not this kind of rivalry that you have in monotheism. So this is more cosmotheism. So there is no God, but the entire cosmos is divine. And Akbar has a central role to play there. So he plays with being Islamic, plays with, the Jesuits really thought, okay, perhaps these Mughals become Christians, but he's just playing with them. So he never gave in to that. And so this is Jahangir, actually. And so he's beyond religion. So this would be a wonderful ideology for India at the moment.
But the point is that with Julius being here, he remains labeled the apostate.
Yeah.
In the case of Akbar, I guess it's not the same trying to do it to an emperor, but I know that he had lots of people at his court that he talked to, and what Badauni says goes. There's also a little incident that is in mind, which is partly urban legend, that when he asked his Navratnas, 9 jewels at his court, to become part of his Sulh-e-Kul or his Din-e-Ilahi, the Indian pronunciation is very Indian. The Farsi in India is different to the way Farsis use there, so it's not Sulh. Mm-hmm. What Raja Mansingh's, he was then the prince, Mansingh's father says very bluntly to his emperor is, I understand what Islam is because all of you around me are Muslim. I know my religion. I know what the Jains practice. I know, but what you're talking about makes no sense to me. So I'm not becoming one of you. Now to say that to your emperor is one thing, but to say to someone who's still discovering a lot of things, intellect, you brought up the word akal yesterday, which loosely in Hindi, Rajasthani translates as intelligence. But I think it means much more in Neoplatonism, in the Sufi way.
So I think one of the reasons why I'm here, so I'm an academic, teaching. I'm not often at a festival like this. I'm really at awe what is happening here.
You need
the crowds.
You need to be here.
And so I think what the reason why I'm here is because I think that historians so far are completely wrong in understanding the Mughal Empire. And that is also about translation. So you must take a Neoplatonic spectacle on what's happening and on the language that's being used. So let's say the main authority in, let's say, the Mughal Empire are historians from the so-called Aligarh school in India. And they have really made a big point by saying Akbar is the first secular ruler of India. So it means that if you find the word reason or ratio, and that comes from the Arabic word akal. So for somebody from the Aligarh school would say, well, you see, this is a modern, early modern ruler paving the way for Congress. So we have a secular India already with Akbar. And although it's a nice story, I think it's not true. Because akal is at exactly the intellect that is the capacity of Akbar to receive messages and to go, let's say, to the other level. So the next level, so to say. So
it's more than just intelligence or intellect.
I think it's
also
in
like
Greek
a filter?
it would be nous, which is a famous word for Plato and for Platonism. So nous is, only some people have nous in which they can share into this higher level world. And so if you would be, let's say, a historian from Aligarh would say, this is always about religion and rationality.
Rationality, yeah.
And that is not the case, because you cannot say Akbar is not religious, because this is extremely religious. So the point is also that akal, so being illiterate, so for him, reading books is a bit stupid. Because if you have akal, you don't need to read. I think this is really great for students.
Wait,
so
let's
if you don't want
this.
to read and you have akal...
No, but does it mean you automatically have the knowledge? Is that by implication?
It's a kind of intuitive knowledge that you have. So we see things, and we think that we know what happens, but Akbar would always see what is happening really. And so it's like the cave of Plato. So you look all to shadows. So we are just shadows. But if you leave the cave, you see that there's another world, and that's the real world. So Akbar is a guy, it's a bit like a bodhisattva. So you leave the world, but you feel sorry for humanity and come back to enlighten them. So that's exactly how Akbar feels. So he is, and people tell him all the time that he is like that. I don't think he thought about this himself at a very early age. So these people really have an impact on him. And they say, you also the Mahdi. Yeah? So we talk about millenarianism. So we know that at the year 1000 was in Islamic era,
Hijri calendar.
1591, 1592. So people were expecting somebody to announce a new world order, and that guy could be the Mahdi, so the Messiah. And that guy also was, so you see a combination of all kinds of expectations, Neoplatonism. What else?
Jos, you're also the historian. For half a second, let me put the footnote there.
Yeah, please.
Akbar is 14 when he becomes the emperor. There are a lot of people around him telling him what's good for him, what's good for them, which is understated, what's good for the empire. How are some of them molding him? Because the later ones, you've mentioned Faizi, Abul Fazl, maybe others. But at 14, is that where they start? Do they wait? How does this go?
No, I think it's, especially I think in the 60s, the 70s, he's still very much the Islamic ruler. So he's not influenced by these Neoplatonic intellectuals that he invites. So actually, if you go to the south of the Mughal Empire, we have Bijapur,
right,
which has a similar court. So it needs more attention by historians. So it's also something that's in the air, but he embraces it and really makes it 2.0, so to say. But that only happens, I think, in the 1580s. So it takes a while.
During the millennial
during the millennium.
Hijri calendar.
Yeah.
So it fits in.
Yeah. So he becomes a bit arrogant, and he thinks that he's beyond everything, and then, so he becomes this holy figure almost, this Messiah. But at the same time, he's also always his playful self. So he's also playing with people at what you can do at a court, which is cruel, of course, because he is in power, the others are not in power.
Do you have an example of that? How would he be doing?
Well, there's this famous story that he is just interested in, okay, we have language. So how does language start? So is it actually implemented by God, or is it something that starts creating while you interact with people?
Yeah.
And then he thought, okay, let's do an experiment and bring some newborn babies into a house and let nobody take care of them. So let's see if they start to talk to each other themselves automatically. And of course, you know, they all became complete patients. Well, it was a disaster. But that for him, you know, you see how a curious mind who wants to do experiments doesn't think about human beings in this case.
I wonder what his family thought of him.
So we should not make him a kind of the flower power hero that he was also.
No, one of the urban legends is probably true. I don't know. You can tell me that. Was when he was having a lot of people, the Jesuits, others, trying to convince him about, you know, following their path rather than whatever he was doing. And he said, let everyone bring their books and let's build this bonfire, fire, and walk through holding your books. Does something like that happen? Is it urban legend?
No, I think that really happened. That really happened. So that's in the European account.
Nobody took up the challenge.
No. Yeah, do you know? I don't know.
Would you?
Yeah.
We could stay with Akbar more, but let's bring in another part of the sun, but the Pope. Can we extend and bring the Pope in now?
Yeah, I know I'm a Catholic, so it's always nice to bring the Pope in. So, well, for me, it was really a surprise to find out that we had a similar cult happening in Europe, but was not that successful. So, for example, the Pope Urban VIII was part of the Barberini family, and he had a kind of personal cult that refers also to the sun. And we have to keep in mind that this is also, again, the Renaissance. This is 16th, early 17th century Europe. And we think about Galileo, and also Copernicus. So there's let's say, the awareness that, let's say, the old world which was Ptolemaic. So the Earth is in the center, and everything is going round around the Earth, was now revolutionized, as we all know, by Galileo. And Galileo, actually, in the beginning, was received very well, because why not? You know, if that is the case, that could also bring us closer to God. So if the sun is really at the center, and if you would be, instead of a Neoplatonic guy, you would be an Aristotelian guy, you would even think that if the sun is at the center, this could be the unmoving mover that Aristotle talks about, where everything starts. So it was extremely dangerous if you would be a Christian, that all of a sudden, you know, we have to rethink everything. And so it was, for the Pope, it was far too dangerous. So he experimented with the cult. He had some advisors. Some of them actually studied in my university, Leiden, and then went to Rome. But then there was the Inquisition, the Jesuits, and in the end, it became an embarrassing situation for the Pope, and it ended. So for me, I think it is interesting to see that Neoplatonism is actually becoming very important in Italy in the 15th century, because Plotinus is being translated in Latin, also in Italian, by people like Ficino. And it becomes very, very important. And also for, let's say, the Italian families, the dynasties in Florence that surround the Pope. And so they are also as excited as Akbar would have been with these new ideas. But then the big difference is, I think, is that in Europe, you have this reconfessionalization. So you have the 30 Years' War between Protestant and Catholicism. So there is a kind of a religious warfare going on in which, you know, these kind of new ideas were actually
discouraged eventually.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then down. Because, you know, the emperor is actually way more, let's say, powerful than the Pope. He can actually impose things on India.
That coming from a Catholic?
Of course, you know, I'm powerful. The Pope is not powerful, but he's holy.
So we come
and there's always this tension in the West that if you have power, you cannot be also holy. So, but that's also the Brahmin tradition, isn't it? So there's always a tension between being powerful and then also having kind of authority in terms of a religious authority. Or
Well,
yeah.
since you mentioned the religious authority, the Brahmins, in the practices that Akbar adopts, whichever point of time he does it, he's also giving, he's appearing at windows, he's giving the equivalent of a darshan.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah, so there is
Sanskrit verses.
Yeah,
all
so
of
there's a
that.
story about what it really means for Akbar. So what he's doing, he's prostrating for 4 times a day. He's prostrating to the sun, or where the sun should be during the night. And then he is, I think you hold your ear. I need the mic. So you hold your hands over the ear. Then you knock with your fist on your head. And then you turn round and you show yourself up to the people in the window that are standing under the window. And this is the so-called darshan that you all know in India, darshan. So people share in the light of the emperor. And then he also recites, according to Buddha,
verses.
He recites 1,001 names of the sun in Sanskrit. So it also means that he was influenced, most probably, by Brahmins, by Jain intellectuals at his court. And for him, the more the merrier. So the more impact of these other people, the more wisdom he could claim, actually.
So a lot of people would read into it this fact that he's maybe trying to please the non-Muslim subjects of the empire by adopting some of these ways. But you're putting a different slant on it, or you're adding to it?
No, I think let's say another, wrong story about the Mughals is that, the Mughals, they came from Central Asia. Babur conquered India. Then there was Humayun going back to Iran. Then there was Akbar starting the empire, renewed the empire. That then he was Indianized. And so he, through his marriage, the famous Bollywood movie Jodhabai, in which a princess, a Rajput princess, is actually married with him, and then also converts him into a nice guy. Because before that he was a kind of an example of mujahideen, a fighter for Islam, whatever. And then he becomes nice, and he becomes Indianized, and he becomes a nationalist Indian hero. And I think I always also comment on my colleagues who have this kind of discourse. A lot of my colleagues are also in the US, who actually try to make this point that Akbar had to make a compromise in order to rule India, because 85% was still Hindu. And so I would actually disagree with that, because he tries to universalize the empire. So he's a Padishahi. So he rules the world. Jahangir, Shah Jahan. And so he is the world ruler. So he doesn't want to talk about different identities. Of course, he doesn't know about nations. That's a very 19th century idea that started and that ended up with Jinnah and with Nehru. That was not India in the 16th, 17th century. So he was not, of course, he was building a bridge to Hinduism, but also to Christianity, to Islam. But in order to do so with all these traditions, you must be universal. And so there was a universal claim. And even, I also worked on the Dutch, officials that visited the court. And they also accepted his code of honor. And so in Persian, kilat. So they went to the court, they gave presents, and then in return, they received a code of honor.
Kilat, yes.
Which is a kilat. And that actually meant, also for Akbar, that actually the Dutch Republic would become a vassal state of the. So they thought universally and not Indian. Although you can still recognize it as Indian, for sure, but it was very much a universalizing exercise.
Well, before you debunk too much more about our Mr. Nice Guy, I think we need to also open it up to the audience, because the prof can keep going.
Yeah.
Right? So if anyone would have questions, otherwise we will keep going. There's a hand right there. Can we have the mic? Do introduce yourself and keep it short, please.
Hi, my name is Yuri. I'm a 29-year-old professional. I am Dutch, and I studied at Leiden University. And I'm just going to say, if you ever come back to give another lecture, there will at least be 3 people in the crowd at Leiden University, myself included. So we're missing you in Leiden. I've got sort of 2 questions. Do you have any knowledge on what happened when the revelation of the Earth not being the center of the universe hit outside of Europe, like when it hit courts like the Mughal Empire? What was its effect? And also, do you have any warnings of the sort of sun worship or light correspondence that we're seeing with modern politicians, things that we have to be careful about in our modern world? Thank you.
So I didn't get the second
Didn't get
question.
the second one. Do the first one.
Okay, so the first question is a very good one, because the question is, okay, was there also a kind of a shock going on? So there must have been a shock. So in a way, it's nice, because the Platonists actually demonstrated that they were always right. Because if you go back to Plato, the sun is always very central. And so, you see, we said already for centuries, the sun is central. So in a way, but the topic that you address is so important that it needs another project, I would say, because there's hardly any response. Not at all, I would say, in the moment that I study. There's no response at all. Although people, let's say in Iran, there is, let's say, between the Jesuits and other, let's say, missionaries there, they interact and talk about this. But for me, it's still an enigma why there's no shock. You could say, well, yeah, it could be. And so perhaps it has something to do also with the idea of science, so that scientifically somebody should be right. You cannot have, let's say, multiple truths. But for sure, I think this is a big topic, and I think the shock really happens 18th, 19th century, and that's another topic. And the second question?
Do you want to repeat your second question very briefly, please?
Yeah, maybe to make it a little bit more specific. You're seeing a lot in India right now, sort of the de-Mughalification of Indian history, where the impact of the Mughals on modern-day Indian society is sort of downplayed, or they're often seen as an oppressive figure in Indian history. How can we move forward in a more enlightened or maybe more wholesome understanding of Indian history?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and that brings into the present moment. That's also a complicated question. I would say that Akbar is a prominent figure and a powerful figure in Indian history. That's for sure. So you cannot, I think it would be a shame if you do not pay attention to this important figure. So I think 20, 30 years ago, I think he was one of the heroes for the wrong reason, because he was seen as a secular guy. So you had Ashoka, you had Akbar, and then you had Gandhi. So these were the three very important figures. Now, of course, the entire world has changed, in particular India has changed. But I think it would be really a pity, because I still think that his experiments of trying to create unity among diversity, unity in diversity, very much an Indian motto, has still something. And also something else I would like to stress is that I said already that Neoplatonism is Middle Eastern, but we also know that Plotinus, who was in Egypt, so in let's say the eastern part of the Roman Empire, he really wanted to go to India and to speak to the Brahmins. And he did an attempt, so he joined the emperor in conquering Persia, but then the battle was lost, and then he had to decide, I go better to Rome. So I think Neoplatonists from the very beginning had a very strong interest in Indian wisdom, as represented by Brahmins. So in that sense, I think this is also a very much an Indian, there's much Indian agency in this that we should re-explore. Also because, for example, there are lots of studies that compare Neoplatonism with Advaita Vedanta philosophy in India. And then they see these remarkable parallels. But nobody dares to say that people really touched on each other, that they really met each other. But in the West, you have stories that Socrates actually met an Indian, and the Indian laughed at him because he was so much wiser than Socrates. We also have the story of, which is actually in Abu Fazl's Akbarname, the story of Tum al-Hindi. So Tum al-Hindi went to Greece, spoke to Plato, and came back to bring that message back. So you have all these wonderful stories in which, India and the West become entangled. And so for that reason also, I think the problem is that Akbar should not be seen as a secular hero, not be seen as a Muslim predominantly. Perhaps his successors were more so. But he is a kind of universal figure that fits so nicely in so many other things that are so topical now in global history.
So still more than a Mr. Regular guy?
Yeah.
I do want to bring in before, I think we have time for one more question, but do look also at the Shramanic tradition, not just the Brahmanical,
Yeah.
because the Jains, the
Yeah, for
literature
sure.
was
Yeah,
all
yeah.
the way up into Central Asia.
Yeah.
Buddhism, of course, does get talked about.
Yeah.
But even the term shaman,
Yeah.
shaman. So do look at that also.
Yeah,
Any
I
more
will.
questions? There are several hands. Questions, please, all in one go, and we'll try and answer. Just hurry up with the mic. Let's try and take the 3 hands that are raised that I can see. Sorry for the rest. You'll just have to wait for the book signing opportunity, maybe. Quickly, please.
Hello. So I wanted to ask you that have these symbolic authorities ever proved more influential rather than the realistic political authority?
Could you repeat?
Yeah, so I think you mentioned that he had symbolic authority. That's something you mentioned. So I think what you can see if you look, let's say, at miniatures that were produced at that time, you will immediately recognize that he is the special guy because there's light coming from his head, and he has this special, let's say, profile that everybody would recognize. So in that sense,
His son carries that forward too.
and
Literally.
exactly, yeah.
Another question at the back.
Hello. My question is on Plato's idea of originality, because he discarded the idea of originality altogether. But in oral traditions, we do have that each and every idea is original of that particular person. So I just wanted to know what are your views in comparison to Plato, and do you subscribe to that idea?
Yeah, I think that's a very, very good question, and I completely agree with the skepticism in it that something can be authentic or original. So I really think, I'm a global historian, so you are very much aware that so, for example, let's say the originality of the West never existed. The West was created by interacting with the East. And so every idea starts by discussion, by dialogue, by interaction. So I think it is not really makes sense to talk about something completely original. But still, in the fusion of things, you can still be original, of course. Otherwise, I would quit as a scholar if that is not possible. So in a way, you always have to deal with all kinds of ideas and then make it your own. And there's some originality in that. So there's always both are actually in it.
Thank you for that. I think we're out of time. We could go on. I think we're going to keep your stage and go on for the next 2 sessions, but I don't think it would be popular. Hope you would agree to come back, maybe with more information on other things. But for the time being, thank you very much for being here. Thank you for being a wonderful interactive audience.